James Burke is a science historian, author, and television producer, famous for his PBS series Connections and The Day the Universe Changed. NMAF correspondent Gwyneth Dolan caught up with him this fall when he was at UNM to give a lecture on the University of Tomorrow. She spoke with Burke about interdisciplinary learning, massive open online courses or MOOCs, and what he thinks the future will look like 40 years from now.
James Burke, thank you for being with us here today. 40 years ago, you made a number of predictions about the future, and many of them have come very true. For example, you said computer-aided learning systems will provide every child with his own plug-in super teacher.
Oops.
And it's true, you know, we've got classrooms full of computers now. Students everywhere are taking classes online where they never even meet their teachers or fellow students in person. And it has brought education to people who otherwise wouldn't have had that kind of access. But is there a downside to this?
Well, there's a downside to all technology because it depends how you use it. I mean, in this particular case, there's much to be said for for the other things that go on in a child's growing up period besides learning facts. It is as important for the child to learn to be a human being among other human beings. So to the extent that technology might remove the child from that facility, then that would be a downside. But I don't think that. I think the idea that children sit and just face a television screen day and night and learn to regurgitate facts is not true. On the positive side, there's no doubt that technology is increasingly able to tailor education to fit the individual student. And it seems to me that ever since we began education, that's been the major problem to solve. The system tends to force everybody to conform, and now technology is making it possible for us to tailor to the idiosyncratic needs of each individual. And you know, when you've got a teacher dealing with you alone, giving you the stuff the way you like to have it, you're going to learn faster and do more with it.
You know, one of the things we've seen develop recently are MOOCs, massive open online courses, which might have as many as 30,000 students, but give those students access to professors at, say, Ivy League schools they'd never otherwise have access to. What do you think of these?
I don't see there's any choice but to move towards MOOCs. The increasing demand from the population at large for higher education can't possibly be met by the infrastructure that we have at the moment. You have to introduce this possibility of allowing people to get an education without either having necessarily the money or the time, or to be in the right place to go to the university, the physical university they would like to attend. So I think in that sense, they are nothing but a positive thing. It's going to take a while for MOOCs to work themselves out. I mean, there's a very large dropout rate because early on, of course, the tendency is for people to say, oh, I'm going to do that. There doesn't appear to be any test about whether I can or can't do it, whether I'm up to it or not. So a lot of people are kicking in there without realizing that's not really what they want to do, and that's not really where they fit. And I think that may be the cause of most of the dropout rate being high. But it'll bed down, it'll settle in, and I think it's the inevitable way for things to go.
One of the downsides is that when you have so many students, the kind of assessment that these classes require are online exams. And a lot of the written work is never seen by the professors, but it is peer reviewed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is this going, can we really replace that interaction?
I don't know. It's too early to say. The experimental sessions that they're already running on peer reviewing, where students mark each other, seem to show that it enhances and improves the students' learning experience. So in the long run, I think in that sense, it's a good thing. As for personal interaction with a professor, I'm not sure that in many cases that ever happened at all. I mean, I was lucky and I went to Oxford and I got a one-to-one Tweedy experience, but I don't think anybody expects that anymore anyway. And there are so many other ways to learn from what a professor might tell you in a personal interactive way, provided by technology again, you know. And there are other professors to see doing their thing, talking their game. So I'm not sure that we lose a tremendous amount by losing that one-to-one relationship.
In The Day the Universe Changed, you argue that we need to know where we've come from in order to know where we're going. But the teaching of history in the United States seems to have taken a back seat lately to a focus on STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, and math. Nobody says, these kids, we need to teach these kids history or they're never going to get jobs. You know, are we missing the big picture?
I didn't mean what you think I meant. I meant if you're trying to look at what is going to happen in the future, the only place to look for what's happening in the future is the past, because there is nothing else, nowhere else to look. The future hasn't happened yet and never will, if you get my drift. So, in every way, you need to know where you've been in order to know where you're going. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to know where you've been in order to be able to quote large pieces of Magna Carta or the Constitution. I mean, in some ways, these could be said to be irrelevant in a sense. There are large slabs of history that are interesting from a kind of archaeological point of view, if you like that kind of stuff, but they're not essential to modern living. I think primarily you need to look back to see why society became the way it did in order to recognize that it may go on doing similar things to you in the future and relate to your own life. But what those things were that caused society to change, because I'm biased, I would tend to believe that these are more the products of science and technology and investigation, scientific investigation, than constitutions and Magna Cartas, which were never really what we think they were anyway.
If we're raising a generation of students who are attending school online and learning from MOOCs, is it reasonable to expect that they'll be capable of that kind of thinking?
I can see why not. I mean, I'm not sure that teaching by rote and getting a child to regurgitate facts is any better training for such a thing than any other kind. So I'm not sure we're leaving anything great and moving to anything bad. So I don't see why. No, indeed, I would say probably the access that technology is giving people now to an enormous range of knowledge is going to make it easier rather than more difficult to understand what went before and what is likely to be coming ahead, rather than the limited amount of knowledge we used to force into heads out of 14 books and 12 hours of teaching on the Constitution or whatever. So no, I'm optimistic. Pessimists jump out of the window and are no longer involved.
You know, we have seen the costs of an education in this country skyrocket lately, and the costs of a traditional liberal arts education have gone so far out of reach for many people that we've come to question the value of it. Is it worth spending 4 years developing critical thinking and reading a broad variety of issues, or should we just focus on career skills?
No, it is worth spending, I don't know whether it's 4 years or 3 years or whatever, but it is worth spending time learning to be a productive and involved member of society. The question is whether or not it's worth the money, and that's a simple question because the answer is find another way to do it without spending that much money. And I would argue that probably one of the things we need to do is to knock down some of the campuses and move ourselves online. For some of the reasons I said before, that I don't think the educative experience will suffer from the intrusion of technology into it. And there's no doubt whatsoever that it's the infrastructure of colleges and universities all over the world that make the costs so big, that put the costs up.
But isn't there something to be said for going away somewhere to focus exclusively on that kind of learning? Whereas if you're doing it online, it means you have more time to work and to do other things, and many people aren't able to spend as much time on learning.
I think it's an old-fashioned monastic view. Go away and stay in your cave. No, I don't think that's true. I think if we can find a way through technology to get people to concentrate for a period of time in learning to be what it is they want to be, while at the same time living in the real world, there's nothing wrong with that at all. I don't believe in ivory towers, never did.
You predicted or you say that information technology is creating a world of increasing interdependence that requires us to be able to think in more interdisciplinary ways.
I wish you hadn't read that stuff. Anyway, yes.
How should we do that?
Well, there are lots and lots of ways, and indeed universities are already beginning to introduce courses or parts of courses that explain why one particular thing that you're studying relates in certain ways to other areas of knowledge. So interdisciplinarity is no longer a dirty word. I I personally would like to see all courses required to show some evidence of the relationship between their material and the material of other courses. And once upon a time it was very difficult because you had to find professors who would cross the line, and once upon a time they wouldn't do that. You usually means you have to hire more people and so on. So there are all kinds of reasons why that was difficult. Technology makes that much, much easier. I've been working on a small tool for a number of years, which I want to try and get out to high school level, which does precisely that. It's 2,800 people linked 30,000 ways, and you take journeys of discovery across it. And you discover, for example, that that Mozart is linked to the helicopter, or that chewing gum is related to Newton. And the trick is to find out why, and in doing so, learn the way in which all the material you pass through is interrelated in some way or other. And that, to quote myself, everything is connected to everything else. And the value of that, of course, is the value that it makes you understand, A, your position in society, B, why what you know is important to other people, and C, why what they know is important to you. And that's part of the business of being a member of a valuable member of a community.
If somebody asked you to teach a MOOC like that, would you do it?
Yes, of course I would.
You predicted the widespread collection and storage of personal information at a time that it seemed very far off. And you also said that people would give it gladly, which seemed impossible. But indeed, the generation coming of age now is used to a much, much lower level of privacy than any generation before. Some of us old fogies cringe at that loss of privacy. Should we just shut up and forget it?
Yes, it's all relative. When street numbers came out in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the early 19th century, there were riots. People said, how dare you tell people where I live? And then somebody said, do you want your post delivered or don't you? And they said, oh, okay, all right. And this is what happens all the time. Privacy is two things. Privacy is what happens within your personal relationships, and that's nobody's business. And the rest of it is what you do about your daily life. And you've lost that privacy anyway because of this data exhaust that we all leave behind us that is picked up. Every time you do anything now, you leave some kind of cookie imprint somewhere. And, that's why, for example, one, I won't name it, but the very major grocery chain in this country, when there is a hurricane alert, they know that the most important thing to put on the shelves is Pop-Tarts. Because when there is a hurricane alert, that's what people want. And they know that because they've done the research in ways that used to be called, in the days of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a violation of privacy. Do you want the Pop-Tarts or don't you? Yeah.
But with the revelation that the National Security Administration has been looking at the phone records of millions of Americans, that was something we didn't exactly think was going on. And some people feel offended that we're being spied on by our own government. It's got a lot of advocates of personal liberties and journalists in a huff. You recently said that there is no chance that the NSA gives a rat's ass about you or me.
Did I say rat's ass? Did you? The algorithm, first of all, people don't listen to you. People don't do anything. Algorithms go there, and they go in looking for a pattern that has certain specific things in it. I won't go into detail because it would be not PC. But let's pretend you're looking for a certain kind of person who's possibly likely to do a certain kind of thing, which is vaguely related to explosions. There are certain things that those kinds of people tend to have related to themselves. Telephone numbers, behavior, where they live, what they've done, so on. The algorithm looks for those things to see if there's a pattern. And then it pulls together all the examples of that and says, try these guys. It does not go and listen to people's phone calls. It's not what the person says on the phone. It's that they made the phone call that matters. So they're not listening to your words. They're listening. The algorithm is looking for the fact that you called Charlie Smith. They don't give a rat's ass what you said to him. Well, maybe. But the important thing is that you made that call. Now, Charlie Smith, a well-known bomb maker. Why did you call him if you didn't want a bomb? Well, find out, and maybe you're okay. But the other thing to be said about all this fuss about the NSA listening to everyone, all governments have done it, all way, to everyone, all through history. And the only thing that limited them was the amount of technology they had to use and the number of people who mattered. And back in the 17th century, 27 people mattered. Now, 56 million people matter. And the technology is there to allow them to do it. But they've always done it. People who make a fuss are naive.
But if we look back into history, hasn't it taught us that there is a value in standing up for the few who are the targets of this kind of surveillance?
I don't believe that the targets, especially with the development of good search algorithms, the targets are not innocent people in general. They are people who might be guilty or might not be guilty. But the algorithm doesn't pull them into take a photograph and show everybody on the planet. It says, let's just double check this. So I don't believe that this witch hunt is worth it. No.
People have compelled the way we live now to Orwell's 1984. What do you think?
Well, first of all, 1984 is long gone. Second of all, when Orwell was writing, and no, let me start again. In 1984, people made a big fuss about it, as I did at the time, because, you know, there were hundreds of computers. They filled entire buildings, and you had to have 17 passes to get near them. They were secret beyond belief. What they were doing was clunky beyond belief. They were doing nothing seriously to do any harm to anybody, but they looked terrifying. They were. Ever heard of Doctor Who?
Yeah.
No. Okay, they were Doctor Who stuff, and that's what the fuss is all about. People, that's a hangover from that time, and also, of course, Orwell is talking about, you know, dictatorial governments in Europe above all. Well, sure, okay, fine, but the idea that it would become pervasive and that we would all live in top-down societies misunderstood what was happening to computers. I mean, the cat's long out of the bag. I don't think we have any chance that there's going to be a dictator in this country for a long time, if ever.
As Spider-Man's Uncle Ben and others have said, with great power comes great responsibility. Is there a sense, do you have a sense of the duties or responsibilities that do or should come with the power to gather this much technology?
Of course, of course. And I believe that there are enough checks and balances in our Western society to make sure that these major corporations that make it possible to do these investigations are correctly regulated. Yes, and if they're not regulated, it's our fault.
Well, if we don't know about it, how do we push for that regulation?
Somebody knows about it always.
You have predicted that in 40 years we will all have autonomous nano factories and that we will be able to manufacture everything that we need. But a lot of things we want and need, you know, guns, drugs, Twinkies, are not so good for us. Won't this cause chaos?
The arrival of the nanofabricator, or Faber as it's now being called, which means that you use dirt, air and water to make virtually anything from the atomic level up for virtually no money, which means you can kind of have a Mona Lisa or a gold brick or whatever you want, or a gun or drugs, means that people will be able, in the privacy of their own homes, to do these things. If they choose to drug themselves to death, that's their decision. It may well be that we will be able, through the motes, that is to say the dust mote-sized computers that will be everywhere by the trillion, running the planet, it may well be that it'll be possible to impose certain limitations on what your Faber will do, like it won't make you a gun, or it won't make you poison, or it won't make you whatever. And that will be a social decision made by everybody on the planet. There will no longer be representatives to stand up and say, my way is right or his way is wrong, because two choices for 9 billion people strikes me as rather odd. So I don't think we'll have representative democracy there to get in the way. What will be happening will be that 9 billion people will be making social decisions about how they want the world to be, and I think that is likely to include maybe agreeing that the motes, these tiny computers, which will be everywhere, and will manage the world and innovate as we require, it will allow them, I think, to make sure that 2 or 3 things like the guns and the drugs don't happen. And they'll happen illicitly, as they always do, but on a much, much, much less intrusive scale. If we're all living kind of separate lives after the great diaspora and we've left the cities, because we only went in there to do the industrial work in the 18th century, if we're all living on a planet spread out about the sort of average population density of Indiana, it's going to be pretty difficult for you to do something terrible to other people, because there won't be any mean streets down which to do it. There'll be a lot of farmland or whatever. But so I'm not too bothered about that.
You know, money used to be our most valuable commodity. Now it's time. What will it be?
It's difficult to say. That's some of the most difficult things to decide on about this post-abundance society is what on earth we will do with ourselves. I'd like to believe that if you have the dust motes there, a giant network of trillions and trillions and trillions of computers containing the sum total of human knowledge, which you can have anytime you like, in the holographic form. You can turn your house into the Globe Theatre and watch Shakespeare, or whatever you like, that people will find in some way there is something that attracts them, something that excites their imagination. We say, oh, well, lots of people are too stupid to think like that. That's because the present educational system fails so many people. Everybody has 82 billion neurons in there. And unless they're sick or physically ill, their brain functions just as well as anybody else's. It's just not catered for. Now, with the kind of flexibility, unbelievable flexibility that the post-abundance fabbers will provide and the dust motes, who knows what people will want, but I think it will be a world in which people will be, I suppose ideally, noodlers. There will be no need for money, there will be no need for position or wealth, there will be none of that. So I suppose people will just have a good time.
James Burke, thank you for your insight and your optimism.
All right, thank you.